Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Kristen Mercuri, and I serve as Deputy Director of Admissions here at the Yale School of Management, and I'll be hosting today's event, which is live online student panel. And the panel is centered around the military candidate and veterans experience. So before I introduce our panelists, I want to offer a few notes about the event itself. First, our aim is to provide a very casual and highly interactive event where you can learn about the experience of our military veterans as well as ask any questions that you have. So please do type in your questions in the Q&A feature versus the chat feature. I will see them here on my laptop and feed those to our panelists. Although our panelists are all U.S. citizens and serve the United States military, we do welcome your questions from around the world. We certainly have a lot of veterans from other countries as well, and this event is open to all of you. And without further ado, I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with where they're from, where they went to school, a bit about your military experience, or work experience, I should say, before SOM, internship, and work experience post-SOM. So if that's a long list, I can help cue you if you forget any of those items. We'll start with Andrew on my left.
Well, hello, my name is Andrew Dalleg, and I come from Southbury, Connecticut, which is not too far up the road from Yale. I went to Boston College as an undergraduate, and then I went into the United States Navy. I went to flight school, and I flew helicopters and then later fixed-wing aircraft for about 10 years. And then at the end of my service commitment, I came to business school here at Yale and spent the summer with a private aviation services company called Gamma Aviation. Very enjoyable internship, loved the experience, and then decided to move on, and I'll be headed to Amazon to work in operations after graduation in just a few short weeks now.
All right, I'm Ryan Degnan, also one of the vet club leaders here, along with Andrew and a third individual who will be joining us later. I don't really have a hometown. I was an Army brat growing up, moved about 18 times, but found my way to Notre Dame for undergrad. Graduated from there, became a military intelligence officer in the Army for about 5 years, and then as I exited the Army, did the Goldman Sachs Veterans Integration Program for 10 weeks prior to coming to business school. So if any of you are tuning in from there, good to have you on board. I interned this past summer with McKinsey & Company in the Denver area, and I will be returning to them after graduation.
Great. And I am Samantha Degnan. I guess I'll start with, if you didn't guess by the common names, I'm married to Ryan, so a partner and a student. I went to Notre Dame as well for undergrad and did ROTC. I commissioned as a public affairs officer in the Air Force. I had a time delay, so I went and actually worked in athletic media relations for a year at Notre Dame, and then moved on to the Air Force, where I worked at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas and then Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs. This summer, I spent my internship at the Boston Consulting Group in their Denver office and worked on a tech project in Atlanta. And I will be going back there full time.
Hi, I'm Vaman Mupala. I'm from Maryland, and I went to undergrad at the University of Maryland, got degrees in English and philosophy. So naturally, I enlisted in the Marine Corps Infantry soon after. I was stationed in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, as a rifleman team leader and assistant patrol leader. After the military, I was ready for something different, so I came here. And over the summer, I interned at Bridgewater Associates, which is the world's #1 hedge fund down the road in Westport. And I will be going back there full-time after graduation.
All right, great. Thank you. And as mentioned, we are expecting a fifth panelist. James should be running over, I think, from the law school, where he's taking an elective course. So we expect him shortly. But we'll kick things off with probably one of the more obvious questions, which is why SOM? And I would like each panelist to answer the question, beginning with why an MBA, leaving the military experience and transitioning into civilian life.
Yeah, so I'll start. This is a super pertinent question for me because I was on the fence between an MBA or perhaps a different graduate degree. But at the end of the day, the MBA is far and away the most fungible of professional master's degree that you can get. And I decided that would give me the best prospects post business school. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And from my brief history, I was explaining I've dabbled in a couple different things. And so I wanted the optionality of being able to get an MBA and open a lot of different doors to careers. I also really like the idea of getting an MBA as a transition tool. In the military, I had great soft skills when it came to people management, and I had a diversity of experiences with a large number of different small teams, but I didn't have any of the hard skills that I thought I would need to succeed in a business environment. So this was, in a way, a forcing function for me to really buckle down and focus on the economics and the accounting, those fundamental skills that are necessary that I didn't get from my undergraduate education.
Do you want to do why SOM, or do you want me to tell my why MBA story?
That's fair. I completely missed that. So why SOM? Well, I mentioned earlier that I'm from Connecticut, and after a little over 10 years of being stationed all over the world, the Middle East, the Western Pacific, somewhat closer, but California and Texas, coming back to the Northeast was really important to me. So I narrowed my search geographically. And then I was really drawn to the mission of Yale. I find that most people from the military are generally mission-driven individuals, and this is a mission-driven school. And the last thing, and I'm sure others can comment on this as well, but the ability to leverage the entire university for your education was really important to me. I dabbled in the idea of taking or getting another master's degree instead of the MBA. But here I was able to get an MBA while still taking some classes outside of the School of Management, and those focused on some of my other interest areas. And so I was able to work at the Jackson Institute. I took a class with a number of undergrads, which I thought was hugely enhancing to the experience.
Before you pick up, Ryan, I just want to mention, for those of you who aren't fluent in our curriculum, the second year of the MBA here at Yale SOM is essentially all electives, and you can take those classes anywhere at Yale University. As a matter of fact, any given year, between 14 and 17% of our students are joint degrees, so they're going deep in another area of study. So it's a very unique offering that the School of Management provides our students. Go ahead, Ryan.
Sure. So I'll start with the why an MBA for me, and this was a pretty long, drawn out decision for me. I'll start with saying that Samantha and I had spent quite a bit of time apart, probably about 50% of our marriage throughout our time in the military, and so that was kind of that was really the impetus for us to separate in the first place. And as we were looking at where we wanted to go, started out obviously with that Goldman program that I mentioned, and absolutely considered that as a possibility for the long term. But what I found when I was there was that finance wasn't quite the right fit for me, and I didn't want to stay in that long term. So as I looked towards what other job opportunities were available, the MBA was the one that gave me access to the companies and the industries that I was most interested in, namely where we ended up going, which is the consulting industry with McKinsey and BCG. So that was kind of the pivot point that we needed. And in addition, it was just a really great opportunity to take a knee for 2 years. Having spent a good amount of time apart, this was a great opportunity to, wake up in the same bed every morning, not have to worry about going to the field next month or deploying or wondering what the patch chart said coming up. So it was just a really, really nice way for Samantha and I to kind of exit the military in a very relaxed way and kind of plan out the rest of our lives together beyond those 2 years. And then as we were considering which MBA to go to, I'll kind of break it out, our reasoning in terms of the personal and the professional. And I'll start with the professional. We were coming from Fort Carson and Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado and kind of knew that we wanted to return there. And we'd lived all over the U.S. at this point, and looking at the various MBA programs that we were interested in, we really were drawn by the national reach for recruiting that SOM provides. Just the fact that we're able to recruit in Denver, I think, is a testament to that, going 1,800 miles away from where the school is located. So that was important to start. And then second, the strength of the clubs here, especially the professional ones, were really a selling point for SOM, because as we were looking to transition into the consulting industry, we looked at the consulting club and saw the really broad array of resources that it provides the students. And as a veteran and a military transition, I knew that there was a lot that I needed to work on and to learn in order to make that transition into consulting. And so seeing that the consulting club provided a really strong foundation to provide that launch pad into that industry was a huge selling point for me. Now, on the personal side, I've got really two more reasons. The first is the location of Yale within New Haven itself. On a broad scale, I'd never lived in the Northeast before. It was the only corner of the U.S. I hadn't touched, and I thought it would be really interesting to give it a shot. But on a more visceral level, New Haven is a really good-sized town, especially for those of us transitioning from the military. There's absolutely great access to really large cities like New York and Boston, which are both short train rides away. But I found that, as somebody who's lived in small towns for a lot of his life, I needed something a little bit quieter, and I wanted to have the access to New York, but I didn't want to necessarily live in New York, and I didn't have the energy for that. So that's been a really, really great benefit to me. And a side benefit of that is Samantha and I are obviously two people with two tuitions to pay and maybe a little bit higher living expenses, and the BAH provided in the GI Bill for New Haven is astronomically larger than what it actually costs to live here. So that's been really helpful. And then the second personal reason for SOM is really the mission of the school. I've said this to a lot of people over the past year as I've talked to various applicants or prospective students. This is the only school that I know of that was founded with the mission statement, that still has its mission statement live on its website, and that actually lives its mission statement on a day-to-day basis. And that makes the transition from military life to civilian life a much easier one, because it's different for everybody, but to continue to be surrounded by mission-driven individuals is really meaningful and very helpful for us in the veteran community.
Thank you.
Great. So I agree with a lot of what Andrew and Ryan have said, so I'll just choose a few extra things to add. Why an MBA, I think, was pretty much the typical reason for a vet. I came from an arts and letters background and was in a soft skills focused job in the military. And I didn't think I wanted to stay in public affairs or public relations beyond the military. So I wanted to kind of build out that skill set so that I could have it then to apply to some of the world's greatest problems and hopefully make an impact in the private sector as well. SOM specifically stood out there for a lot of those same reasons. The mission was a big one for me, which Andrew and Ryan both touched on. But I think beyond that, the network that SOM offered was very unique to me. I didn't see myself wanting to necessarily leave public sector type work forever, and eventually would like to maybe go back into those spaces and have that access. And SOM's really uniquely positioned where we have a much more diverse network, I would say, of what industries people go to. We send the most people into nonprofits, but then we also have a lot of people that go government, public sector, and then, as Kristen mentioned, the joint degrees as well. So you just end up with such a diverse network of people in every lane that you could ever end up in. And that, to me, was a huge value add. I think another thing that no one's touched on yet was just the size and the culture fit of the school. For me, I think that I knew I didn't want to go to a huge school that felt like you were a little bit of a number going through a system. And even from throughout the admissions process, there was just so much customization and so many touch points at the university that I felt very included and very welcomed, and it just felt like a very tailored experience, and that mattered a lot to me, especially just because I was career switching too and felt like I would need a little bit of tailoring and didn't know exactly where I wanted to be on the other side coming in. So I would say those were the main things for me. And then just in general, when I came to visit campus, I just felt like I really connected with people here in a way that I didn't at other schools, and it was just a very welcoming, collaborative environment. So those were mine.
For me, for the MBA, being in the Marine Corps Infantry, there's no immediate exit option outside of private military contracting, I guess. And the MBA definitely opens a lot of doors and acts as a great signal to employers that not only can you lead from the vet's experience, but that you've learned enough content to be somebody worth following in the business world. As for SOM, I really fell in love with the story. I always compared it to like a growth stock versus a value stock, especially for the last few years. And if you come here, you can see that everybody here is in a growth mindset. Every class is better than the one that came before it, and everybody's doing bigger and greater things as time moves on. And I really loved how at SOM, you can be a part of building something new rather than going maybe to other business schools that have been around for way longer and have a way bigger reach and brand name. SOM gets better every year. It keeps crushing it, and just being a part of that collective spirit of a small school, doing great, doing new things was really what drew me.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple questions coming in. Thank you for those, and we'll start with the first. It's in regards to the Veterans Club. Okay, so the audience would like to have a sense of what types of programs and activities that the Veterans Club hosts and initiates.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ryan talked a little bit about the clubs at SOM, but the clubs are focused on filling in the student experience outside of the academic and the recruiting aspects of the school. And so some are a little more social and some are a little more professional, but we ended up, the Veterans Club, falls on the affinity social side. And what we try to do is hold events that either, are fun for the vets. So these would be things like happy hours where we get together and discuss whatever's going on at the school amongst ourselves. They're just friendly social occasions. But we also do outreach events for the school at large. And so during, right around Veterans Day, we hosted kind of a themed week of events. We started with a physical fitness session, and then we moved on to a panel not too dissimilar from this panel, except focused on questions that our civilian classmates might have for people who had served in the military. And then, we do some outreach to employers as well to arrange for connections. A lot of large employers are looking specifically to hire veterans who have MBAs, and so we're the main point of contact for them.
Yeah, so I'll build a little bit on what Andrew just said, but first I want to mention a good way to learn more about us would be on our website. So it's just www.yalesomveterans.com. And there's information for prospective students as to the admissions process, as well as a community section where you can see a little bit about what we've done on campus over the past year or two, and some profiles on some of the vets that we've got here. But I would break really the Veterans Club into kind of two lanes, which is one, the community lane, and two, the professional development lane. Andrew just discussed a lot of the community events we do, many of which are centered around Veterans Day itself. But there's also a number of events we host throughout the year, including just informal get-togethers with the club and happy hours that we'll use the club budget to pay for and things along those lines. On the professional development side, we have sponsor companies, for one, who we interact with on a little bit larger basis than with non-sponsor companies. So they'll come to campus and host Veterans Club specific recruiting events. They'll provide us with a little bit of funding to help either educate first-year members about what the company does or what the industry does, or host a specific happy hour just with that company and just with the Veterans Club. And then in addition, we have a lot of informal coaching we do between first years and second years as the first years are getting ready for the recruiting process, just to help them maximize their chances in the interviews.
Great, and I know you can't see him because I see what you see, but James has just joined us. So if I could ask everyone to, there he is. Okay, now the audience can see him. So before we move to the next question, I'd just like to ask James to introduce himself. If you could tell us where you're from.
Yes.
Where you went to school.
Yep.
A little bit about your military experience, internship, and post-MBA.
Sure. My name is James Flannery. I'm from New Hartford, Connecticut. I went to West Point. I graduated in the class of 2009. I was an infantry officer. I was a platoon leader in 101st Airborne Division, 3rd Brigade Combat Team, Rakkasans. And then in 3rd Ranger Battalion at Fort Benning, Georgia. And then ended my time as a company commander at Fort Hood, Texas. I would say that, and for my internship last summer, I worked for Liberty Mutual Insurance, and I'm going back there full-time in July. I would say that if I could give advice to prospective MBA candidates who are currently in the military, I think that, I know I personally really despise the concept of networking and reaching out or asking for help really with anything in my life. And I think that a lot of veterans or people still in the military looking to apply to a program like this often don't either ask the right questions or a lot of questions in general. And I think there's also sort of a social impediment to trying to reach out to people in programs to ask questions about how to prepare for the admissions process, whether that's taking the GMAT, crafting essays, who to write your recommendations, sort of all these things that I learned somewhat anecdotally through my friends who had gotten out of the Army and had gone on to top tier MBA programs. I would just say that, like Ryan was mentioning, we've been intentional about setting up a website and trying to make some more information public to anyone who is looking to connect with someone and ask some honest questions about the MBA admissions process and then the MBA experience itself and recruiting for jobs post MBA. So that would sort of be my advice: is don't let your pride or recalcitrance to ask for help from people who are there keep you from sort of asking the right questions.
Great, thank you. And I think that signals that we would love to hear your questions. I have a couple more. They're both in regards to money, which is a big question that many of you have, and we'll certainly tackle that. But I want to reiterate that this really is a high-touch place. So not only are current students available to you, and actually they've all agreed to share their contact information post-event. So you'll get a recording of this event in addition to their direct lines. And certainly in admissions, we're more than happy to pick up the phone and chat with you anytime about your questions about the admissions process. And if you have questions about admissions or how the admissions committee works, feel free to type those in as well. So what I do see a couple questions in regards to funding, both mentioning the 9/11 GI Bill and Yellow Ribbon. So the first question for the panelists and for me as well is, John is looking to know how many of you were 100% or what percent eligible for the bill? And if you weren't, how do you find alternate means of funding? So I just want to put out there to kick off the conversation that we are a Yellow Ribbon school. And for the most part, this isn't entirely black and white, but if you do qualify 100% for the 9/11 GI Bill, we essentially can make you whole in that you wouldn't pay tuition. Now, again, it's a little more complex than that, but in a nutshell, that's essentially what we're looking at. We also have the ability to offer scholarships, merit award scholarships on top of this funding if chosen, of course, in the applicant pool. So are any of you comfortable kind of sharing your a few details about your GI Bill and support?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start because it's fairly clear cut. I was 100% eligible, which, to Kristen's point, there's a very generous Yellow Ribbon match here at Yale SOM. And so the financial aid calculator and the financial aid department, they're not represented here today, has been fantastic in their support. It's very clear cut that it's 100% covered when you look at the total cost of attendance. That does translate into, it depends on the insurance options you select and things like that. So there can be some expenses that you should plan for. I'll finish with just a few things I wish I had known before I came to Yale SOM, or really, this is applicable to any school. I left the military after I got in, but because of the rules about resignation, I couldn't get off active duty until the beginning of September. And so technically I was on terminal leave when I arrived here. And that's fine, and I was receiving my military paycheck. But my last day of active duty was September 6th. The VA will not give you BAH for any month in which you spend even one day on active duty. And so I didn't receive any GI Bill BH until October, and because they paid in arrears, there was a bit of a gap there. It was fine, and I had savings to cover, so it was not financial hardship. It's just something I really wish I had known ahead of time so I could have planned on it a little more. And then Additionally, this is super simple and really shows that I was a bit clueless as I was leaving the military, but I didn't realize that you only get the BAH for the time you're in school. So they'll prorate it for the months where you may only be there for some of the month because the semester ends in December and there's still 10 days left. And likewise, you won't receive it over the summer. So as you're planning your financial calculations for your transition, you should take these into account as well.
Great, it's helpful.
I'll jump in as somebody who's not 100% GI Bill. And the biggest thing I have to say on that is I can't reiterate enough how much the BAH here really helps make it affordable. If you have even only 40% GI Bill, you can pay for your rent, your utilities, and probably a little bit extra just off of the BAH because we ended up zoned somehow with either Stanford or New York City, and New Haven simply isn't that expensive. And then the second point I'll add is from a health insurance standpoint, I did Yale health insurance last year, but didn't want to pay for it again this year, and have since transitioned to the VA hospital that's out in West Haven. And despite the rumors, I've actually had a fantastic experience with them. I've never waited in line once, and the doctors have all been incredible. So I pay $0 for that. I think I have a $15 copay anytime I go in to see them, but the healthcare has been very affordable and a great experience here as well.
Right. Anything else to add?
Yeah, I was 7 years active duty, so I was technically like 9 months short of 100% GI Bill eligibility because I went to a service academy. For me, the opportunity cost was to go to Kuwait for a year or 9 month deployment that was coming up on our unit's calendar. So I didn't really do any math, but I figured that delaying business school for 2 more years to go to Kuwait for 9 months was not worth that for me at the time. So I paid a bunch out of pocket from my own personal savings. But as Ryan alluded to, the BAH definitely defrays a lot of your rent and living expenses while here. And then also summer employment opportunities can result in you being able to also, make money that will help that you can put towards tuition. So.
Great. Okay, very good. So we have a question about the admissions process that I'll try to tackle, and I'll actually lean on you a bit here. So the question is to the panelists, essentially, how did you articulate your military experience in a way that would be relatable for the admissions committee? So as you think about that, I would just like to say, a little bit about myself. I sit on the admissions committee, I should say. And I come from a military family, although I didn't serve myself. I do have a sense for the type of leadership training and exposure that you can receive in the military, as well as the heightened level of discipline and understanding of commitment that can come with that. So speaking on behalf of the admissions committee, we do highly value military work experience. I often receive questions, does it weigh the same as someone who has spent 3 years in a bank, maybe a more traditional MBA candidate? Do you consider military work experience as work experience? And no, they don't weigh the same. I think we see some really unique qualities in military candidates for the most part. And those skills and attributes very nicely transition into an MBA program. So we highly value this experience as an admissions committee, and certainly you'll see that employers do as well. So our military candidates are often landing jobs before others, and as you heard, some very highly desirable positions. So going back to the question, how do you articulate, essentially working with the resume, how do you translate this military work experience into civilian experience so that the admissions committee can understand? I want to let you know that in the past few years, we've started a new initiative where the admissions committee leans on current students in translating resumes. So we actually have a small group, and a few folks here with us today are in this group, who review resumes for us and help us understand the breadth and the depth of your work experience. So it's essentially industry experts that can help us better understand your performance and your achievements, et cetera, because that can be difficult for someone to tease out who doesn't have military experience or recent military experience. I believe the Veterans Club also may offer some services or is available to you. So if anybody wants to speak on how you could help students prepare to translate.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump on it. So if you reach out to us after this, we've got a document that we can send you that provides some basic guidance. But essentially, what we look to have you do is try and make your application a full circle. So talk about where you've been, how that shaped you, what you've become, and then where you want to go from there, and how Yale SOM can provide the foundation or the launch pad for you to get there. And that's kind of the best practice we have for veterans in the application.
I would say that the biggest challenge we see, definitely the biggest I faced in having a resume that made sense, because I'd never written a resume, really before I had to do one to apply to these, to business schools, was making sure that you kind of strip it of all the jargon and replace it with terms that can be understood by civilian counterparts. One thing that was really helpful for me in that is I reached out to a friend of mine who had done an MBA previously, and asked him to, give me some solid, candid feedback, which he did. And, we went through a bunch of iterations on the resume, cleaning that up. And then I gave it out to some friends and family members who had never done any military service, just asking the simple question is, does this make sense? Does it look good? As we just alluded to here, we as a club are happy to take a look at prospective students and their applications. Krista mentioned that we also will review resumes with the admissions committee and translate them for them. We do separate those, but we're happy to pair you up with somebody who will give you feedback on your application, and then you'll still have someone else who will be sitting with admissions and helping if they have any questions on it, so that it should be. We try to make it as clear as possible, given what we have to work with.
I just want to reiterate what Kristen said about the special qualities of military service. Translating your military experience into resume is great, and talking about how much inventory you controlled or what type of logistical hurdles you had to go through. But at the end of the day, what really differentiates us are all the stuff like the leadership, bringing together diverse teams, being in stressful conditions and making split-second decisions that you have to live with. All that stuff is really what sets us apart, and don't be afraid to hit that in the essay and talk about all the intangible stuff that sometimes we take for granted when we're in service because it's just the way we operate, but it provides a lot of value to admissions officers and whoever else you may be talking to through recruiting for jobs. And I would say to really get a tight handle on your story as far as that goes.
Yeah, just building on what Vaman said, I think that when we have these experiences and you're around a lot of other people that have similar experiences, you kind of forget how compelling those experiences can be if you tell them in the right way and choose the right stories. And so I think, like Vaman was saying, I think that one of the biggest strengths that we have as vets is that we do have a story that is really interesting in general and also specifically in an MBA context. And I think it's just really thinking strategically about drilling down to the core assets that are present throughout your story. That's kind of the way I thought about it, of like figuring out what the strings are that are throughout your story. And when you get down to core attributes like leadership or courage or comfort with ambiguity, whatever you're choosing to make your things, if you can find a way to make those compelling, and those are ultimately the same things that people are trying to parse out in their other careers as well. And I think we're uniquely set up to do a very good job of stringing those together. So I would think of it less of as an impediment and more of the fact that we have a great context already. So then it's just figuring out what lanes you want to follow, essentially, to tell a good story.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. So we have another question, and I encourage you to submit more. This one is a little bit personal, so I would encourage this person to maybe reach out to me specifically. It's more of an admissions-related question to someone who started a master's degree in marketing and has a few follow-up questions. So email me. I'll provide the email address after the event. And beyond that, looks like we don't have many other questions. So I want to ask a few questions I often hear from military candidates who are thinking about an MBA program and thinking about the Yale School of Management that hopefully will resonate with many of you in the audience today. The two questions I want to make sure we cover, careers is always a big thing on your mind, right, and the transition. So I'd like to ask the panelists, what career resources have been available to you here at the School of Management and within the network that have helped you make that transition? I know, Andrew, you started with, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and that's very common, and that's okay. But what are some of the resources and guides that have been available to you?
So just to reiterate, I came to business school and I hadn't quite figured out what to expect. And you're going to be surrounded by people who are talking about some of the traditional industries that you can go into, like finance, consulting. Yale SOM did an amazing job explaining where you can go. And you definitely don't need to limit yourself to any of the, just because something is what most people do. There's a lot of options. But right at the beginning of the first year, there was a set of panels with people who were recent graduates and would give you essentially an industry primer. And I think they had like 10 different industries that you go through. The clubs are a fantastic resource as well. So if you're interested in technology or general management, there's a club for that. And of course, as Ryan talked about, the Vets Club itself maintains connections with a few firms, and there'll be veteran-specific recruiting events early on. And then you can talk to the actual practitioners or the employees from these companies and get an idea of what they do, whether or not you think it would be a good fit for you culturally, if you'd be interested in the work at all. And so asking tons of questions. But the employers, there's a lot of employers that just come onto campus. And so you generally get access to people, you can find out straight from the source what the company life is like. And that's just because Yale has a strong brand name. And so they're gonna come here and recruit. And even if they don't have an on-campus presence, there's still a lot of contact information for other firms. And if you reach out to them and explain your position as a Yale MBA candidate, they're going to take your call and they're going to give you some time. You should be able to have a conversation at least.
Yeah, and I'll keep this short and sweet. Yale SOM veteran alumni. That's who I basically use for all of my recruiting and who I continue to keep in touch with.
Yeah, I agree. I think just two more I'll add. We talked a little about professional clubs, but I think that one of the unique things, this was specific to me doing consulting, but I think that finance is pretty similar, and a lot of the other clubs have similar type programs where they'll create essentially a curriculum where you meet like a class every week and you work through a curriculum and learn all the skills you need to learn. So whatever point you're starting at, you ultimately end up at this high caliber interview quality, which I found incredibly useful coming from zero background and already feeling like I was a little bit at a disadvantage in the process. To have that rigorous curriculum that you could opt into was really helpful just to get the foundation that I felt like I needed to be confident by the time interviews came around. And then, of course, there's the CDO, which is our Career Development Office. And there are various ways that you can work with them. They have people that work, they have staff that work in specific industries that you can work with to either tap into that network. So maybe if you're doing a less traditional recruiting, they can help you kind of make those connections if they're not on campus already. And then they also have a career advisor program, which I've been involved with this year as a second year on the other side, which is where you'll get linked up with people that interned in the same industry that you're interested in, and they can help provide interview practice, resume reviews, a lot of the things that we kind of have in the Vets Club, but those are kind of filled out in general for other students as well. But it's a lot of the same kind of things, so you'll probably be more likely to tap into Vets Club, like I think most of us did, versus the career advisors, but that's another good resource, just to have another person help you through the process.
When James was talking about that reluctance to reach out and network and learn about things, that was definitely me. I knew nothing, and I didn't reach out to anybody to learn anything before business school. So I had to learn everything from scratch, and the CDO was fantastic. My CDO coach, Michael Colelli, did a lot of appointments with him, and he pretty much just like refined my story and pretty much tried to distill into an essence of what I was good at and what I was looking for and how I can pitch that to employers. So that was hugely helpful. The clubs were great. And one overlooked aspect is I really think the integrated core helps a lot. because SOM has so many switchers, and they get you from 0 to 100 very quickly. And the fact that you step into this building and you start classes and already you're modeling and learning all these cool frameworks and then learning corporate finance and all that, that brings you to a level of fluency and vocabulary about the business world very quickly, and that's a huge asset in interviews as well.
Yeah, I would say most people I talk to before coming to business school were kind of like, oh, you'll figure it out when you get to business school, you'll be fine type thing. I would actually take the position, like Andrew was talking about, the first week during orientation, they have a bunch of different, employees of different companies and across industries and sectors come in and talk about like, well, this is sort of like the track that I am in. I would just say that in the time you have between leaving the military and starting business school, it would be a good idea for you to do some, ground research of what the corporate world is and what different companies and industries are, and at least start to get somewhat of a working business vocabulary. I think that would have been helpful to me when I arrived. It's kind of at, square one. So you can kind of focus your recruiting your first year a little bit more intelligently if you've done some homework prior to that. So that's what I would offer you.
But I would say that even though that would have been probably better for both of us, we both did okay because the support network is in place here to help you.
Yeah.
Great. So now we're getting lots of questions, thank you, although we have about 4 minutes left. So I'll tackle a few of them, and then again, we can certainly follow up after the event. So one question has to do with support for partners of SOM students. So what is the support? Is there a club for partners? And is there something specific to veterans?
There is a formal partners network or club, I believe.
Yeah.
And then the support for the military-specific partners is there. It is a little more informal in the interest of keeping it short and sweet.
Yeah, but I would say it's a pretty small, tight-knit group in general. And so there's a really strong community for both partners and vets. And I don't think no one really treats a partner differently than a vet. It's all just sort of one community of all the same people.
Yep.
Just like in the military.
Exactly.
I mean, like everyone's families end up becoming friends. Like everyone sitting at this panel here is like, these are my best friends here at SOM, and all of our significant others and family members hang out socially all the time here. So.
Yeah. With the exception of the professional happy hours, the military spouses and families have been invited to every happy hour we've had.
Great. We have a question about the application process in regards to letters of recommendation and who is best suited to write those for you. The person asking the question specifically is saying, do you lean more on your academic or your military recommenders? And I can tell you up front from an admissions standpoint, the best thing is to have a current or recent former supervisor write your letters of recommendation. That's option A. That's not always possible for some folks, depending on who your supervisors are and if you've shared with them that you're leaving to get an MBA. In regards to academic, we tend to only see academic recommenders when someone's very near to their academic experience. So maybe they're a year or two out of school at that point. So if you've been out of school for 5, 7 or so years, we look to see someone from your professional experience write those letters. In addition, for the panelists, would you find yourself asking peers, raters, or senior raters for recommendations?
I'll start. I was a company commander when I left, so I had my battalion commander, who was my rater, write my letter of recommendation, and then I had my old Ranger company commander, for whom I was a platoon leader, write my other one. So I would definitely say people who know you at your best and worst, that you've fought with, that you've experienced hardship with, who know your character thoroughly, are the best people to write it, as opposed to like a big name or like some general that you think might get you pull somewhere. Pick people who know you.
Yep. And the only thing I'll add to that, so I also used a past company commander And then rather than using my senior rater at the time, I was a battalion S2. I had the brigade S2 write it as well because I had worked a lot with her, obviously.
Yeah, I think the important thing, and there's no harm in talking to the reviewer. When you ask for a letter of recommendation, you can explain the process and what you're trying to do and what your goals are. That's not putting your thumb on the scale. It's just making sure that you're having a good conversation with somebody so that they understand your intent in any of this. Because it's a little different than maybe some of the letters of recommendation that you may have seen in military service, where it's almost more of a formality form letter and they sign it at the bottom. This is very, it's almost like getting a rating done on you. So that's why raters are a really good resource for that.
Great, perfect, thank you. So we have some questions that we're not going to get to. My apologies, but please do reach out to us. Again, we will have a follow-up email in the next week or so that will have a link to the recording of this event as well as the contact information for all of us. I encourage you to reach out. I also wish you all of the best in your MBA journey. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to my panelists.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone.
Good luck.
Good luck.